right. Hello, my name's Robert Baines. I'm the president of the NATO Association of Canada, a charitable NGO dedicated to informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. These are issues that most Canadians, most of the time, don't have to worry about. And that is excellent. That's what all of our forebears would have wished for us to live in, that kind of a world where we don't have to worry about our security. However, at the same time, that very condition leaves us open to forgetting the very important lessons of history and the reasons why we've created so many important institutions like NATO since the end of the Second World War and all of the death and suffering that went with that conflict. The NATO that we have today is an amazing institution based on a very simple idea that an attack upon one is an attack upon all. It's based on non-zero sum ideas, which means that everyone who's part of an organization puts a little bit in and gets a tremendous amount out. That's what NATO did with security and defense for Canada and for so many other nations, now 32 across Europe and North America. Today, we're going to talk about one of Canada's premier allies, Latvia. Of course, Canada is part of and leading the enhanced forward presence in that country, and we've always had a great relationship with the country and their ambassadors to Canada, and especially an absolute delight to have His Excellency Kaspars Ozolins in our discussion here today. I should mention that all of you who are watching, please do remember to subscribe to NATO Canada, our YouTube channel, and to keep part of the conversation throughout the year. On Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. We need more Canadians to pay attention to what's going on and to be connected with the globe and Canada's presentation on the global stage, because it's written into our DNA as Canadians as the important thing that Canada can do to raise on many shoulders the rules-based international order of which NATO is an integral part. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our three moderators today, Bogdana Torbina, Apostolos Sezos, and Gleb Adamovich. My three outstanding team members here at the NATO Association of Canada. I give you the floor, and please introduce our outstanding and distinguished guest.
Thank you so much, Robert. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our series of events celebrating NATO's 75th anniversary and the member states of the Alliance. My name is Bogdana Torbina, and I'm an engagement coordinator at the NATO Association of Canada.
Hello, my name is Gleb Adamovich, and I'm a program editor at the NATO Association of Canada.
Hello, I'm Apostolos Sezos, and I'm the events coordinator here at the NATO Association of Canada.
We are honored to be joined today by His Excellency Kaspars Ozolins, the Ambassador of Latvia to Canada. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, before we get into the Ambassador's opening remarks, I would like to briefly go over his bio for our audience. His Excellency Kaspars Ozolins holds a master's degree in history from the University of Latvia and has previously been posted as Ambassador of Latvia to the Czech Republic, Croatia, and Denmark. Ambassador Ozolins began his diplomatic career with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1994, working at the International Organizations Department and the Security Policy Division, as well as later heading the Russian Division and the Security Policy Department. His Excellency has served at the Embassy of Latvia in Sweden and the USA, and represented Latvia in the trilateral Latvia-Russia-OSCE Commission. Ambassador Ozolins became Latvia's ambassador to Canada in 2021. Ambassador, we invite you to begin with some opening remarks before we begin with the questions.
Thank you very much for a kind introduction. Thank you, Mr. Baines. Thank you, Ms. Torbina. And thank you, the NATO Association of Canada, for organizing this online event. I appreciate your effort in reaching out to broader public with a view to informing it about international developments and security policy. Especially, I'm happy that you decided to invite diplomatic representatives to share their representatives during US series on NATO 75 and accession of countries in the last, let's say, 15, 20, and 25 years. I have a particular pleasure to take this opportunity due to the fact that Canada, through NATO, is deeply and for a long time involved in defense cooperation with Latvia to make sure that the eastern flank of NATO is not endangered by Russia or anybody else. Canada's presence in Latvia is prime example of NATO at work. And I will gladly tell you how it works, how it is important for us, how it is important for Canada, and what is the broader context of strong bonds among NATO countries. I'm glad that the event is also online and thus accessible to so many participants who otherwise would have to travel to be part of it. So at the beginning, I want to say that Latvia's view on European security today cannot be detached from the history of creation of Latvia's statehood in 1918. Our independence had to be won first in the defensive war against Russia, and it lasted 22 years then. Then, as a consequence of the Second World War, my country was swallowed by Russia for 50 years. And finally, after regaining of independence in 1991, it was clear that we should not try to be entertaining any other ideas. We have to seek NATO membership. Latvia joined NATO 20 years ago in the largest enlargement wave in history of NATO. By qualifying to join NATO, 7 Central European countries significantly contributed to both future security by ceasing to remain in security gray zone and consolidation of democracy, human rights, and accountable governance in European countries. Currently, despite the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, we in Latvia feel more secure than ever before in our history. That might sound paradoxical to most of you, but that feeling stems from our historic experience that we see actually today repeating in Ukraine. In essence, using analogy familiar to Canadians, I can say that the 3 oceans that protect us is NATO. In an ever-changing international environment, with an ongoing Russian brutal war and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, strong and united NATO remains essential for transatlantic collective defense against all threats from all directions. These threats cannot be addressed by any single nation alone. It is essential to tackle them collectively by all 32 members. In current unpredictable security setting, we will face 2 main goals. First, to deter and defend NATO's own territory against any potential aggressor, and second, to provide all necessary military and financial support to Ukraine in its just and defensive war against the Russian invader. Both are equally important for our own security, since our collective support to Ukraine to win this war lends a necessary credibility to our own deterrence efforts. And we here have work to do. On both accounts, every ally, big or small, must lean in. Every effort counts, and every contribution is needed now and in the long term to keep members of Alliance as safe as in first 75 years. Canada was a big part of creation of NATO 75 years ago. Canada was first to ratify our accession to NATO. And in the past 7 years, Canada, through its true presence in Latvia, is a big part in my country's compatriots feeling safe and secure. We joined NATO for search of security. Now we want to strengthen NATO to be able to continuously enjoy benefits of security. So we hope that it will never be required to invoke Article 5 again, like it was after 9/11/2001. As Canadian Secretary of State for External Affairs, Lester Pearson said at the signing ceremony of the NATO Treaty 75 years ago, this treaty is not a pact for war, but a pledge for peace and progress. We in Latvia are committed to keep that pledge, and we want to do it together with all allies. So I'll stop here in my introductory remarks, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for the opening remarks, Ambassador. As you have mentioned, Latvia celebrated 20 years of joining NATO this year as it joined on March 29th in 2004. Can you please talk a little bit about the ways in which Latvia's role within NATO has changed since its accession and how you see Latvia's contributions evolve in the future?
Yes, sure. So NATO came out of Cold War as alliance able to protect security of its members. And after we regained independence, our domestic slogan was "Back to Europe," where Latvia belonged to before World War II. In institutional terms, Europe in 1991 meant NATO and European Union. So accession to both became our natural goal. So first thing we had to do is to get rid of the Soviet occupying force that we still had on our soil, and we did it by 1994. Second, we had to build defense forces to be able to contribute to international peace. Thereafter, accession to NATO was the only unparalleled security guarantee we were aspiring to. There were ideas like neutrality or that EU membership alone would do the trick, or some sort of US, Russia, or other kind of security assurances. But I think that we see today that these type of alternative solutions were out of the question as a feasible security solution for us. To become a member of NATO, we had to prove that we can contribute to international peace. Bosnia was our first international peacekeeping mission in 1996. We joined Iraq and later Afghanistan missions to prove that we are not security free riders. During the build-up of our defense forces, we were asked to contribute troops to international missions, and not to try to build our defense forces with purchasing, let's say, expensive platforms that NATO countries had plenty, like jets or tanks and things like that. And therefore, our specialization within NATO at that time was, let's say, demining, special operation forces, demining at sea, and other capabilities that would need more explaining, let's say, if I use those terms. So this is how we ended up basically with air patrolling over the Baltic Sky after our accession. So the NATO suggested that we don't have to spend on planes, and that of the model, I don't know, like 2,000 fighter jets in Europe, it would be easily to set up air patrolling of four planes over the Baltic Sky. So our determination to commit to international peace and missions was also exhibited during financial crisis of 2008-2009, when we increased our troop contribution in Afghanistan. So these are types of, let's say, capabilities as we were and engagements with the NATO missions that we worked on. But of course, the security situation was changing, and as you may recall or may know, that Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and at that time, of course, it was important for us to show that we are committed to a NATO, let's say, peace role in its missions. So apparently, after first years of developing expeditionary capabilities to support NATO missions, after 2008 Georgia war, we started to push alliance towards defense planning for contingencies that may happen on other borders of NATO. And as a consequence, let's say in 2013, NATO had its first Article 5 exercise after the Cold War. The other evolving, let's say, security issue that we started to, let's say, experience was disinformation, propaganda, and the capability that Latvia produced at that time in 2014 was a Center of Excellence for Strategic Communication. I guess in the following years, so I think most of us learn of its value. After Russia's annexation of Crimea and intrusion in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine, Latvia embarked further on building defense forces for more like territorial defense. And in 4 NATO members bordering with Russia, forward presence battle groups were established to serve as a tripwire force. And that also meant that there was another role that we had to assume as a NATO member, and that is host nation support. So we never had friendly troops on our ground beforehand, and this was a new way we sort of contribute to a NATO mission. This time it's the forward presence. Well, full-scale aggression of Russia against Ukraine in 2022, of course, was another game changer for entire alliance. But this is roughly, how we went through the accession of NATO and what type of capabilities we were able to provide to NATO missions. And right now, of course, we are back to square one. It's the defense and deterrence of NATO countries themselves.
Thank you. As you have mentioned, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As a neighbor of Russia, what does it mean for Latvia to be part of NATO in these times?
Well, first of all, it was clear that the decision to join NATO was the right one for us, and it was made in right time, and that we actually used the time allocated, let's say, for us to join that alliance. Russia's war against Georgia and Ukraine proved that Russia has no intention to be peaceful and democratic in relations with its neighbors, and therefore it's better. Definitely, it's better to be part of NATO because Russia doesn't attack NATO countries. Second, that I can mention is that Russia felt that before invasion of Ukraine, Russia felt that NATO, EU, or West in general is weak and will not support Ukraine, and Russia was wrong on that. Level of unity of NATO's response to Russia war against Ukraine is a good indication that West is stronger than Russia thought, and is acting even in defense of non-NATO member states. And that was quite reassuring for us as well. Thirdly, NATO has taken, as was mentioned before, all necessary steps to strengthen easternmost allies, and that is another thing that reassures us quite significantly. Another thing I can mention is that there is in the public documents of NATO, NATO collectively perceives Russia as a threat to international security. That is based. The basis is sound, and same basis for evaluation of security situation around us by all NATO members. So there is common situational awareness. So that allows for swift decision making, joint action, and thus makes NATO more effective for its members. And that is also something that makes us feel much better. the last point I may offer is that by seeing NATO and Canadian troops on ground, by seeing decision making of NATO, our citizens feel more assured and secure in our country, regardless of the fact that our neighbor is waging war against its other neighbor. But of course, there is, as I said, there is a huge difference. So we are part of the NATO. Ukraine is not, but the fact that there was such a united response in the West on the Russian invasion, so that is also giving a very good hint to what kind of response Russia would expect if there is another sort of delusional step of hers. Thank you. I'll stop here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Your Excellency. Earlier, you mentioned the forward presence groups that NATO has currently deployed to Central and Eastern Europe. Could you go more in depth about what you mentioned as Latvia's role as a host nation for these groups and what the role of the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence Force is in the defense of Central and Eastern Europe?
So indeed, I think the decision of NATO in 2016 to establish forward presence battle groups in the size of battalions was a right political signal to Russia, and also to citizens of the host countries, 4 host countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. So it was a signal that NATO collectively is acting when there is a war of aggression and redrawing borders right next to NATO member states. So visible presence that signals a commitment. So this is how we sort of would characterize the EFP. Well, Latvia is particularly assured that there are 11 nations represented in the battle group currently, and I think the number will stay the same. So this is truly multinational commitment to defend eastern border. In this case, let's say Latvia, and that is very, very reassuring. So if we look at I mentioned that initially the concept was established in 2016, and right now we are switching, let's say, moving to second phase in involvement of concept of EFP. So in 2016 Warsaw Summit decision, it was decision to put up the tripwire force. That was too small to fight. But that was more like a political signal. So in 22, after Russia's full-scale aggression, and after what the world witnessed of what kind of atrocities Russian troops were able to commit in Bucha, Irpin, and other places in occupied Ukraine, it was clear that the tripwire concept doesn't work and is not the best one, because the NATO territory needs to be defended from the day one, from the first meter. So it wasn't enough, let's say, to accumulate the force over time, and then try to beat back aggressor if it decides to do something. So that means that the role of the EFP is evolving in correspondence or in accordance to what are developments on the other side of border, meaning what kind of decisions Russia is making and has made towards Ukraine, and continuing, let's say, with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Currently, I mentioned Madrid decision, but part of the Madrid decision was actually to increase the number of the battle groups from 4 battle groups to 8 battle groups, covering all eastern flank countries and in NATO. And that is And that is another, let's say, significant decision where battle groups are training and exercising together with local defense forces, with each of the host nation. So I guess we have a slight advantage. I mean, the four first countries that had the battle groups have a slight advantage because the enhanced forward presence has been on our territory for almost 7 years now. So Canada is for 7 years in Latvia, with troop rotations every 6 months. So which means that around 6,000 Canadian troops have been through training and exercises in Latvia already. So they know local environment and people, they know terrain to operate, they know actually, and they have familiarized themselves with Latvian defense forces, and they know other nations that are part of multinational force in Latvia. So another thing that I should mention probably is that really a huge change for security of the Baltic Sea region is accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO. Their membership means a lot of military strength, clarity, let's say more clarity in defense plans that will be adapted to the new, let's say, membership requirements. It means better resupply of forward deployed forces in the Baltic states. So the accession of those two countries and actually readiness to join Canadian-led battle group is a really big deterrent effect as well.
Thank you, Ambassador. In 2023, the Canadian and Latvian defense ministers signed the roadmap for scaling the enhanced forward presence Latvia battle group to brigade. By 2026, Canada will complete the full implementation of persistently deployed brigade capabilities to Latvia, at which point the brigade will have up to 2,200 Canadian Armed Forces members as part of the enhanced forward presence and supporting elements in Latvia. Do you believe this will be enough? And what more do you think needs to be done by Canada and other NATO members?
Thank you for that question. It's a fair question because we know the probably the scale of let's say Russia's aggression may not be necessarily commensurate indeed right away in terms of the NATO presence in the eastern flanks. But I will say that I can respond to that question, let's say, in two big blocks of, let's say, answers. So the first, NATO, first thing is NATO does have an effort to make deterrence by denial work and to make it credible, and it will not happen just a flick of fingers. The second thing, of course, is that we have to remind ourselves and remember that the main focus right now is to help Ukraine to win the war of Russia's aggression. So, but exactly as you mentioned, the roadmap foresees full operational capability of multinational brigade by 2026. Well, scaling up the brigade is a huge task that our both countries, like Latvia as a host nation and Canada as a framework nation, are implementing step by step, and we yet have to get there. But I think that we are doing well and probably are ahead even of our neighbors. I also want to mention that we will not. Well, in your question, you asked what countries can do, what NATO countries can do, and I should say that we shouldn't only look around what other countries can do, but we have to do our homework, let's say the maximum that we can do to protect ourselves and to strengthen our defense. And I think it should be also interesting for Canadians to learn that we are not, of course, sitting idle and trying to beef up our defense, and also to be sort of good host nation for a multinational brigade. So what we are doing is last year we renewed conscription. So we have a professional army and a conscription were introduced back, sort of, and that is needed for building our reserve forces, so that the let's say active armed forces can be augmented during the crisis or contingency. So that is one important thing. So 3 countries at the level of ministers of defense have agreed to, in next 5 years, to build a system of defensive fortifications along our eastern border. So that is quite a sizable task, and hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent on that one. So we are continuing procurement of weapon systems for our defense. So then, as NATO Forward Presence Brigade is, let's say, expanding or scaling up in Latvia, so we have to complete the new military base and training polygon for the troops, for the NATO troops. So that needs to be done in the shortest possible time. And for all of that, so we have to finance all of that effort. So right now our defense budget is roughly 2.4%, and we're going up to 3% in the next 3 or so years. So we will be contented, of course, if we will complete the roadmap as foreseen by 26 in scaling up to a brigade. But I also want to mention that Canada is already doing more than it is foreseen in scaling up to brigade level. And for instance, the Minister of Defense has announced that Canada will send to Latvia helicopters to operate in support of its troops. And I assume also that in the future, after replacement of fighter jets in Canada, Canada may also want to decide to renew rotational air policing in the Baltic sky. So that air policing is taking place from the airstrips in all 3 Baltic states, and currently it is done from Latvia. So I would be happy to see Canadian new F-35s in the Baltic sky operating either from Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, but that would be another contribution. I should also mention that the Canadian led brigade, in case of contingency, will implement the NATO defense plan that is worked out by Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And that is another thing, that those defense plans need to be made executable. And for that, we need to fill the gaps in capabilities that probably is there. And that is of course another, let's say, next best thing along the scaling up of brigade. And I hope that all of NATO countries and Canada is part of that process. Related to the defense plans is also issue of NATO's new force posture that was adopted in Madrid NATO summit in 22. That also needs to be sort of addressed in a proper way. So the brigade probably is the issue number 1. It's the deterrent factor, but it is also built up as a combat ready unit. but of course the plans are foreseeing more than that. So the other block that of answers that I mentioned to you is related with the help to Ukraine. So we need to support Ukraine to win this war. So of course, first and foremost is continue to supply of weapons and ammunition. So we are of course looking towards the decisions in the U.S. House of Representatives. So we hope that in tomorrow, I hope that tomorrow the right decision will be made there on the Hill, and that is what all of us are looking for. Second thing, of course, regardless of the debate that took place in the U.S. Congress, so the European countries also stepped up their support to Ukraine, and we're not just leaning back because of the fact that U.S. Has not allocated additional money in support of Ukraine. So the other important thing, of course, is to continue with implementation of sanctions so that Russia is deprived of the sources to wage war. And a big part of that, of course, is not just sanctions alone, but to see to combat the evasion of those sanctions. And the third, let's say, very big part for all of us, but also for the future shoring up of Ukraine, let's say, defense and security, is rebuilding or reconstructing our defense industry here domestically, but also in Ukraine. And this is also what we are looking at in my country to support a defense industrial base so that we can defend ourselves in the case of contingency and can supply our armed forces. So that's why we are looking at, we are actually building armored personnel carriers in my country for our armed forces, but also supplying to other countries. And there is an interest to buy Latvian-made Patria personnel carriers, and we are also looking in cooperation together with the European nations to be part of the ammunition supply chain. So those are, let's say, two big blocks, two big issues. So we need to work step by step on both of them. It is relatively clear what we need to do at NATO and domestically. So I would not want to go right now further and let's say trying to push allies to do something more. It's rather sort of I try to outline actually what we ourselves are doing, sort of to prove that we are investing all of necessary efforts in defense of our own and thus the defense of the eastern flank.
Thank you, Ambassador. I wanted to stay on the topic of alliance, and I wanted to say that along with neighboring Baltic countries, Latvia is an eastern host nation to many NATO battle groups from all across the alliance. As we've discussed, allied forces partake in international collaboration on Latvian soil, benefiting from joint exercises and deployment. But here is where I want to ask, how has Latvia and their armed forces benefited from its participation in these NATO initiatives?
So first of all, well, thank you. That's I wish I had my defense attaché with me, you know, who would be able to respond in a more precise way on that question. But the first thing that comes that I need to sort of to stress, of course, is that well, Latvia is also Latvia is part of the NATO, and whatever we do domestically or together with other NATO nations, that's a part of us being a member. Of course, I mean, the trainings and exercises that are taking place on the Latvian soil in the Latvian training roads are hugely important for our armed forces, and it's morally rewarding to see that other countries are committed equally, like your own armed forces, to fight for your country, as you were fighting actually in international missions far away countries. So I think it is also, I think, rewarding for the defense forces to see the battle groups of our neighboring countries occasionally coming in for training and exercise. So this is how they can train together. So this gives this feel of the, let's say, of the shoulder, that we are in the game together. Of course, the multinationality itself is very useful factor, because we can see how NATO countries operate, what types of weapons, ammunition systems they have, and how we can put together all of that, let's say, force into credible and viable fighting unit. And I think this training is super useful for our armed forces and also for any NATO country, because we see actually how does it work in a practice. So you have to do training and exercises together to make sure that NATO troops can operate in a coordinated fashion and in a bigger formations. Is it like battle groups, is it smaller ones, or brigades? So that's hugely important. And then of course the intensity of the training itself. So I imagine when Canadian troops or Spanish, Italian, Polish, Albanian or Czech or Slovak are coming to Latvia, they want to see this as a really good exercise for them. They want to see it's really good learning opportunity, and this is why. So we want to maximize on their presence, and we're trying to let's say exercise, train, and fight together. So but when what I can mention, of course, I mentioned you have the two phases of the enhanced forward presence, that we are moving from tripwire force to battle ready brigade level. So that means some change for our National Defense Force, because so far with the battle group, battalion level size battle group, we had the best integration of that battle group in our army, in our defense forces, under one command. So it was not standalone or set aside, let's say, force that was fully integrated into Latvian Infantry Brigade. So right now that multinational battalion is pulling out of that Latvian land brigade and will constitute the brigade of its own. So basically we will have to replace that battalion with additional force, and this is why one of the reasons why we're having conscription reintroduced to fill that gap. So there is a lot of work to do together, a lot of lessons learned from what we have had in the past. It is morally rewarding, and it is good to see that so many countries are ready to be part of that exercise in deterring potential aggressor and defending eastern flank of NATO. So that would be my relatively short answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. That was very insightful. I wanted to return to an earlier point and look at the question of alliance from a slightly different perspective. Since Latvia is one of the NATO member states that's currently meeting the 2% military spending benchmark, as you mentioned earlier, you're sitting at 2.4% and increasing up to 3%. Do you have any comments on the importance of military spending and on how other NATO members could endeavor to reach this goal?
Well, Well, the goal, I would say, is not spending. The goal actually is capabilities. The key is capabilities that spending brings. And I think I mentioned in one of my earlier answers that now during the wartime and after the war, we'll have to make sure that NATO defense plans are fully executable, that we have all the capabilities for that, and I'm hoping for that. So, and we need to spend the money for that. I'm saying actually in my remarks sometimes here when I'm speaking to my colleagues in Canadian, let's say, armed forces or politicians, is that to my mind, well, the 2% metric for defense spending was useful during the peacetime, to have some sort of benchmark, that would help to keep our defense forces strong and operable and deployable during the wartime, like we see right now. So when we have our plans, so basically we need to work towards filling the gaps in those capabilities that we are missing. So, and I do not know how much would that cost. If that's 1.7%, if that's enough with that, that's fine. It might be 2.3% as well. So we sort of had an idea how we have to increase our defense spending by which year, but actually we see that the developments on the ground and the need actually to sign the contracts with the suppliers of defense material expedited that spending, and we actually are spending more and ahead of the schedule, and because this is priority. We see it as priority, and this is how we approach also defense budget. So actually the government, when government sits together at the cabinet meeting, they set aside what's necessary for defense, and then they are looking at other parts of the budget. We see this is essential right now to strengthen our defenses. The other aspect that I could touch upon is it goes beyond a little bit beyond the current strengthening of eastern flank of deterrence and defense that we are building in the eastern flank, but the other threats are, let's say, permeating, let's say, environment, including, let's say, the cyber threats, space communications, undersea cables, the same information, disinformation, social media, and so on. So basically, I guess that only collectively, as I said at the opening remarks, so NATO will be able to address those issues, only all of our countries together, and that will require resources. And there will always be new challenges, and our adversaries are trying to weaponize, or let's say, many spheres of our let's say lives, and that applies also to new technologies. I guess that many of new technologies will also be weaponized to gain advantage in, let's say, international relations. So this is why I think we are working at NATO. We are looking at those issues holistically. So we're trying to see the threats coming and from all directions, and be collectively ready to respond those. And we are setting benchmarks. So there has been a decision to go above 2% within NATO, and I think that the countries are going towards that goal, or let's say following the path. but it would be I guess not for me probably to push the other countries, knowing that most of the countries or all of the countries are increasing defense expenditure, and that there is a right trend, it is a right understanding, and eventually sooner or later we will reach that goal of necessary spending that would support the defense planning that is done at NATO. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Ambassador. One final question that we have prepared here, and then maybe we can get into the Q&As if we have a little bit of time at the end. I wanted to focus on this idea of defense budget and note that Latvia is set to increase its defense budget substantially, reaching $1.7 billion by 2028, a significant rise from $1 billion in 2023. What I wanted to ask, though, was how will these budgetary increases translate to actionable military force upgrades or restocking or other changes for the forces of Latvia?
Yeah, well, it's good that you mentioned not the percentage of the GDP, but actual numbers. So you see that 1.7 billion that you mentioned, I guess, probably is not that much what you would need for defending against such a giant like Russia to our east. And regardless of how much we would spend, that would not be enough. But we are, as I mentioned to you, we are moving from. It's not like moving. We are, in addition to professional forces, we are conscripting and enlarging our force that way. So this is one way how will be spending our money. Of the gaps that I mentioned is the as you see in Ukraine, what Ukraine is asking us today is the air defense. So the integrated air and missile defense solutions are the ones that are very, very expensive and that are sort of comes in many layers. So I'm glad that Canadian government decided to support the battle group with buying the shortest range, the missile defense. So we are trying to buy the next step, the mid-range weapons, but there is more that we can do, and that all of that requires money. Then, of course, long-range rocket artillery. That would be very important for us, and the munition that I mentioned to you already, munition that we are trying to produce together with will be producing together with European countries, and the stocking of munition for future, let's say, contingencies. It's quite a big task at the rate of production of munition right now. So it will take a long time. So and all of that requires money. So I guess I guess we'll have a full list of the things that we need to deliver with that money, and hopefully the NATO countries will do it together. And part of the enhanced forward presence and part of the thing that makes us feel, let's say, more secure and is that pre-stocking of the weaponry, the equipment, munition in our countries. So Canada is starting to pre-position forces. So the most visible and the most potent weapon that was sent to Latvia last year in November. So the Leopard tanks of Canada landed in Latvia. Right now, this year, we have had a couple of shipments of military trucks and other equipment that is coming to Latvia and will be pre-positioned, and that is all of that is increasing the speed of reaction of the battle group of entire NATO in case of emergency. So there is plenty for us to do right now. We need to grow. We need to fill the gaps, and we need to stock the ammunition. And then, when all of that is done, so then the other parts of the defense bill will be servicing all of that equipment. So no shortage of let's say the equipment and weapons to spend money on. But I think when we do it collectively together, all of us in a coordination, I think that makes most of the sense.
Yeah, right on, and that goes exactly along with the values of NATO. I wanted to ask two questions in one, just really quickly, if you could give a response, just being cognizant of the time, it's almost 12, to hear the two questions. The first one is, these are both from our audience. With so many challenges facing NATO, what do you see as the most significant weakness of the alliance? And then the second one is, as discussions on defense integration within the EU continue, how does Latvia see its role in shaping the EU's common security and defense policy?
Okay, so the first question was the weakness of NATO?
Yes, so weaknesses, and then weaknesses was the first one, the second one was, how does Latvia see reshaping the EU's common security and defense policies?
Yeah, okay. So I thank you for the question. So right now, as I sort of trying to describe of what NATO is doing and how we're working together, so it has made our life in NATO much easier. So when we joined NATO, so nobody saw Russia as a threat, apart probably from the Baltic states and Poland. Right now, we are all on the same page, and it is relatively very easy to make decisions at NATO, and to implementation of those decisions, of course, always takes a little bit longer. So I wouldn't be able to quote any and unwilling actually to quote or to mention any weaknesses just because of the amount of transformation, amount of effort that has been put into NATO to be ready to face new security challenge, which is Russia, to all of us. If it was not the case, I would not be claiming that our people in my country are feeling secure. We can always say that there is more that you can do, but look, we have already, so the decisions that we have made, the roadmaps that we have drafted and signed, so that makes our plate full of meaningful and very important things that we need to do. And in the meantime, NATO is also streamlining the procedures, so we are going on those ones as well, to, let's say, to shorten the time that is needed for the decision making. So I think I wouldn't say that there is any particular weakness right now. Otherwise, we would not have seen countries in our region, let's say Finland and Sweden, willing to join NATO. So in that respect, I would rather say that we in the Baltic states probably were less surprised that Russia launched a war against Ukraine, first by annexing Crimea, then Donetsk, and then a full-scale war. So that's probably less surprising to us than the fact that Sweden, who had a 210 years now of non-alignment policy behind it, and a country that was able to survive 2 world wars, decided right now that it's the right time to join alliance. So apparently that strengthens also a country like Sweden, and that to me is that decision is probably to me more surprising than what Russia was capable of doing. So the only thing I could say probably in nowadays, especially since you have, let's say, multiple challenges and crises going on at the same time, and you have to adjust with the NATO. So the one thing probably is the speed. So we are good right now at the speed of making decisions, but implementation of those could be better. But also, we know what are the circumstances. We know that there is no, let's say, ammunition, weapons, equipment, or something on the shelves produced somewhere that we could buy it. It all is long-term, let's say, long-term contracts, but that is not something that you could sort of attribute as a weakness of NATO. This is a fact of life that we are trying to address, both at NATO, but also in the European Union. You see that the European Union is investing also in security and defense. So I think the European Union has made a giant leap towards being a security and defense actor in the world, and most immediately, let's say, in Ukraine, in support of Ukraine, and we have been advocating actually of CSDP in the past, looking more towards immediate neighborhood of the European Union, because you cannot claim that you are a global player in the rest of the world if you are not able or capable, let's say, to act in your immediate neighborhood. And this is something that changed in 2022. And Russia made the European Union also as a strong defense and security player. And in that sense, so it is positive developments within the European Union. European Union is not shying away. European Union is trying to provide answers and response to the security challenges as we are seeing them right now.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That looks like that's all that we have time for. We would all like to convey our most sincere thanks to you for agreeing to come in onto Zoom and have this discussion with us. Your responses gave me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our audience can agree. And with that, I would like to pass it on to our President and CEO, Robert Baines, for closing remarks.
Thanks so much. Gleb, Bogdana, Apostolos, great job. Always a pleasure to have our team able to be so involved with our discussions with our strongest partners like you, Ambassador Ozolins. A great pleasure, and always interesting to hear the developments. I mean, we've been doing this for years now with you specifically, Excellency, and it's always interesting to see how things have changed month by month. Now that Canada is moving on to a larger position in Latvia, investing even more, and seeing down the road how we're going to sustain 2,200 troops as the lead of the new brigade. It's just a pleasure to see how much effort building again and again can make a big difference and cement the union of our two countries as great partners as members of NATO. So thank you so much, Ambassador. It's really wonderful, and also to hear you speak about the importance of NATO to your country and helping to make sure that Canadians understand that this is how we would like our country, Canada, to act, how we would like to be seen on the world stage, and how we would make sure that our values and our interests are maintained through our collaboration with Latvia and the other 30 nations of NATO. So thanks so much for joining us, Ambassador. A real pleasure.
Thank you very much once again. I just want to, one final sentence is that I want to say that NATO works and deterrence works, and the Canadian-led enhanced forward presence is a peacetime mission currently, and we need to do everything that's possible that to make sure that it remains like that. It has to remain like peacetime mission, and then our job will be, say, complete and well done. So thank you for your efforts trying to promote information and knowledge to Canadian public as well. And I'm always happy to come back to you and talk to you and also to the audiences that you may wish to invite. So thank you very much once again. It was a sheer pleasure.
Thank you, Ambassador, and to all those watching, thank you. And please stay engaged with us on social media, on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram. The discussion never ends. We have to continue educating ourselves and making sure that all Canadians appreciate